In this example, we're going to create the crosstab formula table that you see here. This table takes advantage of some features that are available only to formula tables. For example, in the left column, we have two levels of grouping. We have grouping by state and grouping by city. So cities within each state are grouped together, and we see totals both on the state basis and on the city basis. Now, with a regular crosstab, you can, of course, create multiple levels of row headers, so you could create grouping by state and grouping by city with a regular crosstab, but the cities and states would appear in different columns, side by side. So what we've done here, putting the states and the cities together into a single column, is something that you can only do with a formula table. Secondly, if you look at the column headers, you'll notice that there are two different groupings within the column header. So firstly, there's a grouping by quarter. We've got the first, second, third, and fourth quarter of the current year. And then we've got a grouping by year. So we have total this year and total last year. And again, this is a structure that you can only create with a formula table because it has diverse groupings in a single column header. Finally, all the way on the right, we have this percent change column, which gives us the percent change from last year's total to this year's total. And this is basically a calculated field. It's an expression, a formula, that takes the last year's total and this year's total and computes the percent change. Again, this additional column here is something that you can only do within a formula table. So what we're going to do now is recreate this example from scratch. We'll start with a completely blank report, add a basic crosstab, and then convert that basic crosstab into a formula table, and then make further modifications to get the result that we seek. So let's begin by creating a blank report. Just a blank tabular report will do. And I'm going to change the orientation from portrait to landscape, so that we have a bit more space side to side. Then we'll add a basic crosstab. Click the crosstab component, and that opens the crosstab wizard. And we'll set up this basic crosstab by selecting a data source. In this case, we'll use the order model, which is our sample data model. And under the crosstab tab, we'll set up the basic structure. For the row headers, we want two levels of grouping, state and city. That's customer state and customer city. For the column header, we want the order date. And since we want it broken out by quarter, I'm going to click on the order date and set the grouping level to quarter. And then finally, for each combination of quarter and state and city, I want to aggregate the product total. So this is the basic structure of our starting point, our initial crosstab, state and city as row headers, order date grouped by quarter as the column header, and product total as the summary. Press finish, and that gives us this result. And we can take a look at this in the preview. Click the preview button. And this is what we've created so far. You'll note that we do have our two levels of grouping, by state and by city. As I mentioned before, those appear in separate columns. And you'll notice that up at the top, we've got our grouping by quarter. Since there's no filter yet in place on this table, what we're looking at here is the data for the entire data set, which goes all the way back to 2010. So the first thing that we want to do as we move forward here is to try to get the state and the city into a single column. And to do that, we're going to convert this table, this existing crosstab, into a formula table. So back to the design view, click on the table, and then right-click, and select Table, and Convert to Formula Table. And that will convert the existing crosstab to a formula table. And one of the interesting things that you can now see is that if you click on any of the cells in the table and look down at the Data tab in the bottom Properties panel, you'll notice that there's an expression, an actual formula related to each of those cells in the table. So each of these cells is essentially being populated by a formula, and you can see that formula by clicking on the cell. And what we'll find out in a bit is that you can actually edit these formulas as desired to tweak the results that are shown within each cell. And that will give you an idea of some of the power that you have when you're working in the context of a formula table. Now we want to place the city values below the state values. So now that we have this as a formula table, what we can do is we can insert arbitrary rows and columns. And so we'll insert a new row below the existing final row. So right-click on any cell in the bottom row and select Table, Insert Rows Columns, and we'll insert one row after the selection. Right? The selection being the bottom row, the left cell in this case of the bottom row. So that inserts a new row, and since we want the city values to be displayed below the state values, you can just click on the customer city field and simply drag it below the customer state field. That leaves an empty column here, and so I'm going to delete that column. To do that, you can select the entire column and press the delete key on the keyboard, or you can select any cell in that column, right-click, and select Column, Delete Column. Okay, in a moment we'll see what we've done so far in the preview, but in order to understand the preview a little bit better, let's try to distinguish the structure here a little bit by adding a background to the state column. So select the the state row. So select the entire state row by clicking in the left margin next to Customer State, and in the Format tab in the bottom Properties panel, specify a light blue background. So that just helps us distinguish the states from the cities by using a color. You'll notice that we're missing a product total for the city. That's something that we'll correct in a moment or two. But let's take a look at the preview, see what we've done so far. Okay, and you can see that we have our states now with a background color. And you'll note that the cities do appear in the same column as the states. However, what appears to be happening here is that the state name is being repeated for each city in the state. So we have 3 cities in the state of California, and the row for California is being repeated again and again for each of those cities. Let's see why that's happening. Back in the design view, if you click on the product total cell in the state row, click the product total cell in the state row, and then go down to the Data tab in the Properties panel at the bottom. What you'll notice is that in the cell area here, the row group is set to Customer City, even though this is the Customer State row. And what that means is that the product totals that we're seeing here are basically being computed on a city-by-city basis. So even though we have, this total appears in the Customer State row, the totals are being computed individually for each city, and that is why the state name is being repeated again and again for each city. So let's correct that and specify that this product total should only be computed on the state basis. So for the row group, I'm going to switch that to Customer State. And let's take a look at the result of making that change. I'm back in the preview. Right. And what you'll now notice is that these totals are only computed on the state basis, and for the cities, we're left simply with empty cells, again, because we have this empty cell in the design view. Now, before we go ahead and correct that and actually obtain the city totals as well, let me just say a word about the selection we made previously, which is selecting Customer State as the row group. You may wonder, as you look at this, what are these designations, customer city, customer underscore city, and customer underscore state? These are, in fact, the names of particular cells. So, if you click on the customer state cell, right, which is the left cell, you'll notice that that cell actually has a name, and the name of that cell is customer underscore state. That allows us to refer to that cell. Likewise, if you click on the customer.city cell, you'll notice that that cell has a name as well, customer_city. So when we make this selection, setting the row group to customer_state, what that is a reference to the customer state cell. So what we're saying is that the product total should be computed on the basis of the customer state cell. Okay, let's create a total aggregate for the city as well. And to do that, I'm simply going to copy the product total that we have for the state. So we'll just right-click on that cell, select copy, and let's paste that down here for the city as well. So now we have product total for the city row as well. But if we look down in the bottom panel, right, click on that product total cell, look down in the bottom panel, you'll see that the row group was carried over from above. So the row group now is still set to customer state, which would not be appropriate because now we want this product total to be computed on a city-by-city basis. So I'm going to switch that to customer city, customer_city as the row group, meaning that the product total will be computed on a city-by-city basis in the customer city row. Okay, let's take a look at the result of that. Okay, and now you can see that the structure in the row header looks appropriate. So we have grouping by state, grouping by city, and the cities appear appropriately under each state. And we've got totals both for the states and for the cities. Let's do a little bit of formatting here. We can format the state values as a currency format. And then to decrease the clutter a little bit, we'll just format the other city totals as a number format. Okay, so I'm going to click on the product total cell for the state, and under the Format tab, I'll set that format to a currency, and then click on the product total cell for the cities, and for this, let's set the format to a number format, and I'll just pick this first default format, but remove the decimal places. So this will basically just give us a number with a comma in the appropriate place, and no other formatting. So now the numbers that you see for the states are in full currency format, and the numbers that you see for the cities are just the number with a comma. Now, this still does look quite busy, but keep in mind that as we go forward, we're not going to have all of these column headers here because we're only going to display quarters for this year. And then an additional couple columns for total this year and total last year. How do we restrict the data to display only quarters from this year? Well, ordinarily, if you wanted to do something like that, to restrict the data that's displayed in a table, what you would do is place a filtering condition on the table. However, we can't simply place a universal condition, such as a condition that says date is in range this year, because remember that ultimately what we want to do, if we look back at the example that we're creating, is we want to have a breakout by quarters for only this year, but then we do also want to have totals from last year, so we can't universally filter the table to return only data from this year, because then we won't be able to have this column that gives us the total for last year. So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually implement this filtering within the formula of the individual cell. And to do that, we're first going to create a calculated field that will basically distinguish data from this year from data from last year. And the name of this calculated field will be year flag. So we'll create this new field called year flag, which will return a string, either ty for this year or ly for last year. So let's go ahead and create this calculated field. To do that, go back to the design view and find the data source, which again is the order model, is the data source for this table. Right-click on the order model and select Create Calculated Field. We'll call this field year flag. Okay, click the Edit button to open the editor, and then we're going to write a little simple JavaScript that will return, as I mentioned, either ty for this year or ly for last year. So I'm going to expand the fields list, and the script will be like this. Okay, so if the year of the actual order date is equal to the year of today, meaning this year, try to get the parentheses matched up correctly. Then I want to return the string this year. So in other words, if the order date is in this year, then this field that I'm creating called year flag will have the value ty, meaning this year. Else if the year of the order date is equal to the year of calc.today minus 1, meaning last year. Let's try to get the parentheses correct here. Hopefully that's right. Then I want this field to return ly for last year. And then just as a catch-all, I'll include one other value. So again, in a moment I'll just do a parentheses check. Looks good. So basically, again, this script says if the year of the order date is this year, then this new field I'm creating is going to have a value of ty, indicating this year. Otherwise, if the year of the date, of the order date, is equal to last year, right? In other words, this year minus 1 is last year, then it will have a value of ly for last year. Otherwise, it will have a value of older. So once you have that script in place, press the Save and Close button. Press OK. Okay, so now if you look at the order model, you'll see that it has a little fx on it, indicating that there is this calculated field in existence. And now we can use this field to place a filter, an effective filter, on this order date cell. So let's go ahead and do that. Right, and so I'm going to click on this order date cell, and then in the Data tab at the bottom, we're going to make a modification to this formula. Okay, so you see the formula down here. And what we want to do is, over here where it says Data Order Date, right, we want to put a filter, basically a where clause on this. And so what I'm going to type is @ meaning where year flag : ty. So basically I'm modifying the formula here, the formula which previously said give me all of the data for all the order dates. Now it's saying give me the order dates where the value of year flag is ty, which means this year. Press the Apply button, and then let's preview this. And what you should see when the preview refreshes is that we're now looking only at data from this year in the column header. The formatting of the column header is not so appealing, so let's make a quick change there before we go further. So back to the design view, click on the cell that we just modified the formula for, and you can see that this cell is now displaying the formula. And let's go down and set the format in the Format tab at the bottom. We'll assign a date format here, and the date format can be something like QQQ, YYYY. The Q's give us the quarter, and the Y's give us the year. If you prefer to see it the other way around, the year and then the quarter, just reverse the order. Press apply, and then take another look at the preview, and you can see that now we have, in the column header, we've got first, second, third, and fourth quarter of the current year. So this is an example of how you can implement filtering within the formula of a given cell. Next, let's return to the design view and add the additional columns that we want. Recall that we want a column that will give us the total for this year, the total for last year, and the percent change. So right-click on any of the cells in the rightmost column, and the easiest way to do this, of course we could do it by selecting column and append column, but probably easier is to go to Table, Insert Rows Columns, and do this in one shot by selecting columns 3 after the selection. The selection being the cell that we've just selected in the rightmost column. So I want 3 columns following the selection, and there they are. As far as the headers go, I can just type those. So just by typing in this cell, I'll write total this year, and then total last year, and then percent change. Okay, we can format these headers to look a little bit more header-like by making them, say, bold and 11 point and centered. Right, so all of these headers will now be slightly more visible. Okay, and then the next thing we need to do is we need to populate these cells over here. So as far as the totals go, right, obviously we're going to want to use the total field in here. So I could copy the totals that already exist in the table in the cells that we looked at so far, but for the sake of variety, I'll do this by going back to the data source. So back to the order model, and I'm actually going to find the total field here and drag the total field into the 4 cells where I want it to appear. So I want a total for state this year, I want a total for city this year, I want a total for state last year, and I want a total for city last year. Now obviously I want these to be aggregated, right? So I want for each combination of state and this year, last year, etc., I want the totals to be aggregated. So for each of these cells, I'll right-click on the cell and select Cell, Summarize, Sum, and again, Cell, Summarize, Sum, and for the other 2 as well. Okay, so now I have for each state and each city, I've got the aggregated total for this year and for last year. Except if we look at the formulas, right? So let's, for example, click on the product total cell for total this year and take a look at the formula in the data tab. You'll note that the formula does not indicate anything indicating that there's a filter restricting this data to only this year. Right, so although we've plopped the product total field in the total this year column, there's nothing in the formula that's going to be used to calculate those values to indicate that this aggregation should be restricted to only this year. So what we'll do is add that in the formula itself. Now you can see there already is a condition clause in the formula. So the formula reads that we're aggregating the product total where the customer state is equal to whatever the state is in that row. And what I'll do is add another clause to this condition with a semicolon. And the second clause in this condition is going to be year flag is TY this year. Okay, so now the aggregated product total here is going to be aggregated for the particular state in that row and for only the data from this year. Right? Only the data where year flag is equal to this year. Year flag, again, being the calculated field that we created using script. So press apply. And then before we're done here, let's actually give this cell a new name. Currently it has no particular name. And so what I want to call this is, we'll call it this year state. So this cell that we just modified the formula for, we're going to give this a name, and it's going to be called this year state because it will contain the total for this year on a state-by-state basis. Okay, let's proceed to do the same modifications to these other totals. So still in this year, I'm going to go down to the city total. And what I'm going to do here, again, is to modify the formula to make sure that it's restricted to just this year. So again, at the end here, there are two condition clauses, right? There's a condition clause restricting it to the particular state, and another clause restricting it to the particular city in that row. And I'm going to add a third clause now, just like we did before. Year flag should be TY. So again, this total should be the total only for this year. And I'll give this cell a name, and I'll call it TY City. This year's total for the city. Continuing on, now to the last year's total. Again, I'm going to introduce another condition clause. This time, year flag LY, last year. So in the last year column, I want to restrict the data to only the data from last year. And I'll give this cell a name LY for last year state, because we're in the state row. Right? These are last year's total state by state. And then finally, in the city row for last year, I'll add the condition clause, year flag LY. So year flag should be LY for the data being aggregated here, and I'll give this one a name LY City. Okay, let's take a look at the results of this. Okay. So we haven't made any changes to the quarter grouping that we had previously, but now we have these additional three columns. We've got total this year and total last year on a state-by-state and city-by-city basis. Let's apply a little bit of formatting here to make this look a little bit more coherent and cohesive. So for the state row, we can apply a full currency format, as we did before for the state totals. So we'll just set a currency format, and we can also set alignment to currency alignment, which is essentially just aligning it to the right in this case. And then for the customer city row, again, we'll just set a plain old number format, just like we did before, just to put commas in the right places. And we'll set right alignment. And taking a look at that result, it seems that I missed the totals this year. I did the totals last year, so let's backtrack and do the totals this year. Same thing, currency and currency alignment for the state, and number format and right alignment for the city values. Okay, so this is what we have so far, and the next task is going to be to compute the percent change between the last year total and the this year total in each of these rows. So let's return to the design view, and we're going to now create an expression, a formula, to compute the percent change in each of these rows. So click first on the state cell in the table, in the percent change column, and then open the Data tab in the Properties panel at the bottom, and we'll set the binding of the cell to Formula. Press the Edit button, which opens up the script editor, which will now allow us to create the formula that will populate that particular cell. And the formula is a simple one. So it's going to be the difference between the this year total and last year total divided by the last year total. So what I did here is I expanded the fields list, and I'm going to find the this year state total. Right, so these are the names that we gave to those cells previously. So this year state minus last year state. Right. The reason I'm writing these as the state values is because we're right now scripting the state row, so I want the percent change on the state by state basis. So I'm subtracting last year's state value from this year's state total and dividing that by ly state. Okay, so this year's total for the state minus last year's total for the state divided by last year's total for the state. You don't need to worry about multiplying this by 100 to get the percentage, because we can always assign that as a format later on. Okay, so there's that expression. And then let's do the cell below it for the city. So again, select the cell in the percent change column now for the city row. And in the Data tab at the bottom, press the Edit button, and we'll write a very similar formula here. So in this case, it's going to be this year city minus last year city divided by last year city. Press Save and Close. And now we have our two formulas here. Let's apply some formatting. So we know that we want these to be percentages. So under the Format tab, select the percent format, and we can also set center alignment. I may have only had one selected there. Let me do this again. Percent format and center alignment. Let's look at the result in the preview. And now what you'll see is that in each row we have the percent change from last year to this year. And that percent change can be negative or positive depending on whether this year's total is greater or less than last year's total. Okay, in the next step we're going to apply a highlight to these values so it will become a little bit more evident where we have a decrease from last year to this year and where we have an increase from last year to this year, so that somebody reading this report can quickly see where the problem areas are. Before we apply the highlight, we should give a name to these cells, which we can reference in the highlight definition. So let's return to the design view, and for each of these cells that we scripted a formula for, let's give the cell a name. So for the percent change for the state, click on the Data tab at the bottom and give that a cell name of percent change state. Percent change state. And then for the cell below that, give that a cell name of percent change city. Okay, now let's create the highlights for the state and city percent changes. So I'll do the state percent change first. Click on that cell, then click on the highlight tab at the bottom, and we'll create a new highlight called less than 0. We'll set the foreground color, which is the text color, to red, and then set the condition. So we want this highlight to be applied when the percent change state, right, remember that's the name that we just gave to the cell, right, so that references the value in that cell. Percent change state is less than 0. So when the value in that cell is less than 0, right, this condition will apply, and the red highlight will be applied. Same thing for the city percent change. You can give the highlight the same name, less than 0, foreground color red, and the condition in this case is going to be percent change city, right, which is the value in that city percent change cell. Percent change city is less than 0. Check out the preview. Okay. And what you should see now is that in the percent change column, wherever you have a value that is less than 0, that value, whether it's for the state total or for the city total, will be highlighted in red. The last thing that we want to do in this example is to add a grand total row at the top here, so that in addition to having the totals computed for, on a state-by-state basis and city-by-city basis, we can also look at the grand total for each quarter and for this year and for last year, and then the percent change last year to this year for the grand total. So let's go back to our design view, and let's simply add a new row above the customer state row. So click on any cell in the customer state row, right-click, select Table, insert rows columns, and we'll insert one row before the selection. Okay, so now we have this new blank row above the customer state row. In the leftmost column, type the text grand total, and you can make that larger, say 11 point bold and centered. Now in each of the left 3 columns, we want the totals to appear there. So over here will be the quarterly total, and then the total this year, and then the total last year. And so, again, you can do this simply by dragging in the total field from the data source. So again, I'm going to find the total field. You could also do this by copying one of the existing totals in the table, but in this case I think it's easier just to find the total field here. And I'm going to drag that in here, and here, and here. Right? And since I want these to be aggregated values, I want in each of these cases I want to be summing up the totals, I'm going to set the aggregation method for each of these to sum. Now for the total this year and the total last year, if I take a look at the formulas for these product total aggregates that I just added, what you'll notice down in the data tab at the bottom is that there's nothing in the formula that is restricting the data to only this year. So again, I need to apply a filter to this formula so that this product total that appears in the total this year column is restricted to only the orders from this year. So again, I'm going to do that by adding a condition here, using the where symbol, the @ sign, and as we did before, year flag this year. So in this cell here where I'm aggregating the product totals for the grand total, I want that to take all of the totals where year flag is TY this year. And let's give this a cell name, and we'll call this year grand. Right, so this is the grand total for this year. Do the same thing also for the total last year. At year flag LY. Right, so for the last year column, I want the totals summed up where the year flag is LY, last year. And this cell will give a cell name of LY grand. Right, last year's grand total. And then moving on to the percent change column, we just need to, again, write a formula here that will take the now the last year grand total and the this year grand total and compute the percent change. So let's go ahead and do that. So click on that blank cell in the percent change column. Under the Data tab, press the Edit button next to Formula, and it's basically the same formula that we wrote previously. It will be this year grand minus last year grand divided by last year grand. Press Save and Close. And let's just format these correctly. So the percent change we would want to be represented as a percentage, so I'll apply a percent format to that cell, and we can set the alignment to center. And then for the total last year and this year, these ones I can set a currency format, and also for the quarterly total. Let's set a currency format for all of those. So I'm selecting all of those cells, setting a currency format, and we can also set currency alignment. Finally, before we do the preview, to distinguish the grand total row from the other rows, so it doesn't all get blended in together, I'm just going to add a thicker border below this row. So select the entire grand total row by clicking in the left margin next to grand total, and then under border, let's give a bottom border with more substantial thickness. Okay, now let's take a look at the preview. And what we'll see is that now we have this grand total row, gives us the grand totals quarter by quarter, and the grand total for this year, the grand total for last year, and the percent change from last year to this year across all cities and states. And finally, you can apply any additional formatting that you want to make the table look more appealing. So for example, returning to the design view, if you want to highlight the grand totals a bit more aggressively, you can simply select those grand total cells, and under the Format tab, set a more bold background, such as a green background or a gray background, and that will make the grand total row pop out a bit more. That's the end of this example, which has illustrated how to create a more advanced crosstab table that incorporates multiple grouping levels in a single column and diverse grouping structures in the column headers.